Hello, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives, and welcome back our good friend Harley Schlanger. Thanks for joining us again, Harley. It's great to have you back.
I missed our last couple of sessions, so I'm glad to be back.
Oh, thank you, and I'm so glad that you could make it this time. Harley, the world is changing fast, as far as I can see. Every time I wake up and go look at my internet, there's something new going on. I titled this show "Can Trump End the Forever Wars?" Um, First of all, is he really trying to, or is it all just getting set for a bigger war with China? That's one thing that's in the back of people's minds. But on the other hand, where does he get the power to do all this stuff? And that resonated with me this morning when I saw him coming down purple colored stairs onto a purple welcoming red carpet that's purple, going into a palace that's lined with purple carpets, and him wearing a purple tie. And I thought, I have watched his ties all along, and before the election, he never went to purple. But now to see him, I'm thinking, is the Roman Empire still kind of simmering behind the scenes and running everything, and he's their anointed Caesar for the next few years, I'm speechless. What can you tell me about the significance of the color purple this morning on Trump's tie?
Well, I think that's one of the royal colors of the Saudi family. And
Okay.
I think that's something that Melania would know. I think she probably picks his ties, but then who knows? I don't know if he would allow someone to pick his ties. But the whole question, there are 2 points that are worth noting. One is Trump is ubiquitous right now. He's where he likes to be, at the center of everything. And that's for good and for bad. It's not 100% clear, as you pointed out, that he has the right direction on everything. But there's a lot that he's doing that's important and could lead to peace. But the second point is, it's not just Trump. There's a global shift underway that Trump is adapting himself to. In terms of the Southwest Asia, the Middle East, for example. A month ago, everyone thought Trump was planning on bulldozing Gaza and building Trump hotels there and casinos.
Me?
Yeah. Well, that's what it looked like. And maybe he would have done it, but he got a pushback from the Saudis. And I think what people have to realize is that Trump is smart enough, probably, to recognize that these things he wants to do, if he really wants to have peace, will require cooperation from other parties, including the Saudis, including the Russians, even including Iran. If you look at the India-Pakistan situation, for example, Trump and his people are claiming that they got the truce. Well, there was also an extensive Russian involvement there, which was important in terms of India, China in terms of Pakistan. So you have what I think Helga characterized it as an historic wave toward a new paradigm. And it's not just coming from the United States. It's coming from countries in the global South. Lula from Brazil played an important role. The biggest problem is the countries that should know better, the European countries, are still in the old paradigm and pushing for war, unwilling to accept the idea that perpetual war is going to stop. It's really so ironic because they say, we want to have a ceasefire right now, a 30-day ceasefire. And then Trump and Putin say, well, how about ending the war? No, he's not serious about a ceasefire. So you see the delusions of the Europeans. And then Merz, who's telling people he's not going to say publicly what he's going to do with the Taurus missile because he shouldn't give that away before he does it. Well, if he's planning on escalating a war against Russia, which could bring Russia into a war against Germany, he damn well better say what he's going to do and let the people who the handful of people who voted for him know that that's what he's doing. So our view is everything has to be transparent. There are things changing, but the change is not just Trump. It really is Trump is doing things, for example, that the Saudis want to do, that the Emirates want to do, that the Chinese want to do. So we'll see. It's one of these moments, John, where you scratch your head every night, you see something you didn't expect, and then you have to be prepared for something the next day.
Yeah, and I've been trained not to keep hope alive. I went to the Jesse Jackson School of keeping hope alive a long, long time ago, and all of the decades most recently have been telling me, no, forget about it. It's no hope. But the hope that what the Ukraine situation and Europe, to me, it's a symptom of the forever wars.
Yeah.
The military industrial complex, and the famous quote from the report from Iron Mountain that war is the best thing for humanity because it feeds our economy and keeps the population right. And the idea that war is supposed to be is a good thing sounds very much like the Roman Empire to me, and sounds very much like the British Empire to me, and the whole extensive wealth that there's got to be is an incredible source of wealth behind the city of London and the old families and all that can call the shots. And then, of course, there's the Murder Incorporated people out there that are always willing to go to work if somebody pays them enough. So the shaping of humanity into a new worldwide empire is still a dream that seems to me quite alive and very busy in fashioning the world to suit its favor. However, if we can stop the wars, then we can stop the war machine and get back to concentrating on what's really good for humanity, of course, and that's a field that you at the LaRouche and Schiller organizations have really talked about a lot. The idea of getting back to a humanistic world where it's not all about money. So I'm still looking, at this as the empire is still there, seething behind the scenes and manipulating things. But if I can have hope that Trump is going to end this forever war in Ukraine and force the Europeans to back down, I mean, why is Europe pressing so hard against the will of Trump? Why do they keep going at this?
Well, let's go back to the United States for a second, because I think as we started talking about Trump, this is the center of the battle. The question of, will the neocons control the Trump administration? And the turning point seems to have been that Trump just got extremely angry at Mike Waltz. Now, he should have known that Waltz was no good. Waltz was a special advisor on counterterrorism for Dick Cheney, the same Dick Cheney who campaigned against Trump. Did no one tell him that? And supposedly he was being pushed by Susie Wiles, who is his campaign coordinator. Did she not know that? I mean, these lapses of intelligence, if they are lapses of intelligence, are potentially fatal, as we saw in the first term. But this time he got wind of what Waltz was up to. And who knows whether Waltz will end up at the UN or not. But in the meantime, he's out of the loop on the policy. And what was Waltz pushing? Iran, getting Iran, and hitting Yemen. Now, the New York Times today had a very interesting article about why Trump decided to pull back from Yemen. We spent over $1 billion to basically blow up some old housing and kill a few people, but having no impact at all on changing the policy of the Houthis in Yemen. Now, what's their policy? It's to stop the genocide in Palestine.
Yeah.
Their fight is not against the United States. And finally, someone told that to Trump. And so what did Trump do? Well, he paints it. We got a deal. We backed them down, and now there's a deal. Well, ultimately, it doesn't matter what he claims. The fact that we're not sending bombs onto defenseless civilians in Yemen is a victory for humanity. The fact that he told Netanyahu, don't expect the United States to back you up if you attack Iran. The fact that Witkoff and others opened negotiations with Hamas to free this one American-Israeli hostage, it's symbolically important, but what's the more important? They didn't check with Netanyahu. They went and did the negotiations with Hamas without going through Israel. And so Netanyahu's sitting there with the expectation that Trump's going to back him up, and now he's seeing that Trump is not going to back him up. Secondly, there's a shift in the population in Israel. Haaretz had a very powerful editorial last week, which basically said, stop the war. Why is it that we Israelis can't look at these pictures of what's going on in Palestine? Because it shows that we're doing it. This is our doing. Is this what we want? And the fact that Haaretz is saying something like that you have other Israelis speaking out, tens of thousands going into the street. Now, in the midst of this, what does Netanyahu feel? He's being betrayed by Trump. So he told the cabinet last night, we're going to have to wean ourselves from U.S. weapons. Well, where's he going to go? There's a very interesting discussion today between Jeffrey Sachs and Judge Napolitano. And Napolitano said, well, where can he go? And Sachs said, nowhere. No nation in the world is fully supporting Israel. Maybe Ukraine would be. But it's the black market. That's where they would have to go to get weapons. And they would probably do that, but that would severely weaken them at a point where their economy is weak. So here's where Trump is helped by reality. Now, if he were to stick with the idea of defending Israel as an American president who's a Zionist, it would backfire on him, make him look bad. And so there are compelling reasons why he's moving in this other direction. Now, Ukraine, look, again, it's a question of ego. Who's got a bigger ego, Zelensky or Trump? And I think that's a pretty even contest. But Trump has more power than Zelensky. Now, Zelensky, if he thinks the Europeans are going to back him up in a war against Russia, he's being misbriefed. The three stooges that we've been calling them, Macron, Starmer, and Merz, and then you throw in Donald Tusk, the Polish leader, are they really going to go to war with Russia? Do they really intend to do that? Do they think the Ukrainian military is going to stand up and fight and continue to fight without weapons? So, in a sense, it's natural law, John, that's coming into sight. And then the question is, how do you get from there to peace? And this is where the foolish Europeans are saying, well, you have to have a ceasefire. Ceasefire means nothing. What means something is when you have an agreement that there are legitimate security demands that the other side has, and that you want them to recognize your security demands, and that's where you start talking. That's what was going on in Istanbul in March 2022. And it was shut down by NATO in the person of Boris Johnson, the buffoon who was sent to tell Zelensky, don't worry, we'll arm you if you fight to the last Ukrainian. So again, reality. Now, the same thing happened with India, Pakistan. You have two nuclear powers going head to head, ramping up the talk of confrontation. Now, here's where I think the real issue comes into focus, that if Trump could get this, he could succeed in bringing peace. Number one, all of these situations are shaped by the British imperial geopolitical doctrine. The Middle East, India, Pakistan, as well as Ukraine. Remember, Ukraine, Crimea was at the center of the imperial warfare between the British Empire and the Russians in the middle of the 19th century. I'm sure you can recite the poem into the, what is it, the famous Crimea.
Half a league onward.
Yes.
Into the shadow of death.
Death rode the 500, yeah. So, this is the British imperial strategy.
Yeah.
Now, so Trump needs to say that. He needs to say, Starmer, back off. You're nothing, and we're not going to let you put the world into war. Now, the other thing then is, how do you get to peace, though? And this is where it's important to listen to the voices from Russia, because they're not talking about going in and taking over Kiev. They're not talking about capturing Warsaw. They're talking about economic development. That's what the Chinese are talking about. That's what the Saudis are talking about. It's the war hawks who think they can make more war by destroying, or more money by destroying things, that are the problem.
Well,
Now,
let me interrupt, though. Isn't it true that the American policy after World War II was specifically to keep Europe from developing its own productive capabilities, to the extent that they wouldn't need American corporations and American capital, which is now apparently, still completely necessary in Europe? I mean, where do they, if they cut loose from the United States, what's left?
Well, I just read 5 minutes ago that the Ford plant in Germany is about to shut down because they bet on the electric vehicles. And this is 10,400 workers who are now on a strike because they're afraid their plant's going to get shut down. The last British steel company was only kept open by renationalizing it by the Starmer government. They're in bad shape in Europe. Well, so is the United States. The place where there's production going on is India, it's China, it's Malaysia, it's Indonesia, it's Brazil. These are countries that are starting to grow, and they're growing based on the idea that they need to invest in the physical economy. There's a conference coming up tomorrow, just as an example, in Germany. The foreign minister of Ghana is going to be here. And the Africa Verein, which is the German organization to promote trade with Africa, was talking about solar and alternative energy. And when he arrived, the Ghana foreign minister was asked, "What are you looking for from Germany?" He said, "Space technology, heavy machinery to build." And he was asked, "What about solar?" And he said, "We got enough sun." And so you see the shift underway, and the Europeans are clueless. There's no creativity. They went on automatic pilot with the US to back them up. Now, I don't think the US policy as a whole at the end of World War II was to make Europe totally dependent on the United States. Europe was dependent on the United States. That was reality. France couldn't win the war. The British couldn't win the war. Germany was flattened by the war. The question then was, what would be the terms of economic development? And there was a fight inside the Roosevelt administration. Roosevelt said, we need to make sure they have full set machine tool capability and infrastructure. And the Morgenthau Plan, named after his Treasury Secretary, who was working with the Dulles brothers and the Wall Street crowd, said, no, we can't let them ever have a full set economy again because of the two wars we've just fought. So there was a big fight, and FDR had a much bigger conception of Europe playing a role as part of a development process which partly was implemented. But unfortunately, when FDR died, his idea of the post-war policy, the Bretton Woods policy, was somewhat sabotaged by people around Truman. And who was it around Truman? It was the Harrimans. It was the Wall Street crowd. And then when Eisenhower came in, he had to contend with the Dulles brothers and again, the Wall Street crowd. So there was a mix there. And the main thing is the person who did understand the importance of sovereignty was Charles de Gaulle. And that's why de Gaulle broke out of NATO, because he said, we are not going to have the future of our country resting in the hands of Wall Street. We need our own nuclear capability, the force de frappe. We need our own independent military capability. And by the 60s, de Gaulle was saying we need to work together with our former colonies to establish legitimate relationships. Now, what did they do? They got rid of de Gaulle. They ran him out. And the French have been pretty much one disaster after another since then. John, you know, when we talk about the British Empire, the French were with Britain in Crimea.
Yes.
The Second Opium War against China, the French were there. The post-war Algeria, Vietnam, the French were there. So you see this little putz Macron is following the worst aspect of the French tradition, which is the imperial tradition. So it's not surprising that he and Starmer are, at least in public, appearing to be good buddies. Then you have this character Mertz. What's his background? BlackRock. He's a speculator. He's a swindler. And he's admitted that he's going to lie because his policies are unpopular. But if you start trying to lie to Putin, you're going to be in some big trouble. So I think the most important thing is you can't tell what's going to happen. You know, Trump could change his mind tomorrow on any of these things. But at this point, I've been watching quite closely what Witkoff is doing. Witkoff basically said the Europeans have to recognize that Trump and Putin have an idea and they're going to carry it out. And Zelensky has to be either go along with it or something else will happen. And I think the same thing in the Middle East. Witkoff met with Netanyahu and basically said, Trump's not coming to see you and we're not going to be working with you. And so Netanyahu said, well, we have to wean ourselves from the Americans. So, you know, it's not that there's a new sheriff in town, it's that there's a new paradigm coming into existence. And you know, that I think is what people need to think about.
Well, this is where I suffer from because of that, the extinguishment of that pilot light in me that gives hope, you know, and I want that hope back. And yet I've never felt comfortable with Trump, but nevertheless, the things that are happening right now are indications that, yes, he is of his own person. He's not run by the secret empire behind the scenes in the city of London. But you know, it's going to take a lot to convince me that you know, Trump is really his own person after all the connections he's had in life. Well, but he is at the top right now, and he's calling the shots. And I do love the idea of Trump and Putin finally ending the British policy of keeping Russia out of Europe and trying to destroy the Russian government so that they can go in and exploit the resources. Russia is the hugest landmass, and they've got incredible amount of untapped resources. And you know, that I think is where it really is at, is that Europe doesn't want to give up on their dream of grabbing all those resources and having a permanent, you know, incredible flow of income just from exploiting the resources, as colonial powers have always done. Sovereignty, you know, Saudi Arabia, we talked about Saudi a little while ago, and Saudi's got its own position on things, and can stand up to Trump and can stand up to Netanyahu. That this is new. Saudi was to me, I thought it was just always a construct of the oil companies, and
It was. That's what it's been.
So how did they suddenly, remember when Saudi tried to sell some oil outside of the arrangements with the West to Greece, and the CIA sent Frank Wisner over there to blow up ships and things, and how do they do it now? That I think it was last year when I read that Saudi was no longer constrained to sell to Western countries, but is selling the oil wherever he wants to. Is this really the emergence of a new round of sovereignty in the world, which I would welcome?
Well, here's what the neocons are afraid of. The Saudis have made a series of deals with the Chinese. And from the neocon perspective, China is the most serious enemy because they're the largest economy and they have a growing military. And it's also very difficult for the US military to figure out how to attack the Chinese without utilizing nuclear weapons. And if you do that, that's it for humanity. So with all the bluster about going to war with China by 2028, 2029, there's no strategy that'll work. Now, then you say, okay, well, let's surround them with hostile powers. And they're trying to do that, for example, in the Philippines with Marcos. Marcos initially was not so willing to be a puppet of the United States, but they pulled some strings and made him a puppet of the United States, and he just lost the election. The election that took place there yesterday, there were 12 senators elected, and only 6 were for Marcos and 6 were for Duterte. And he's trying to impeach Duterte. He's on an anti-China course. Now he's going to have to change directions. The idea of getting India to break with the BRICS, which was Blinken's attempt to carry out a Madeleine Albright style blitz. It's funny, they talk about a charm offensive. It's hard to imagine Madeleine Albright and Blinken as being charming, but they thought they could pull Modi away. Now they thought they could use a Pakistan war with India to pull him away, and it almost worked. But Modi's got to deal with the fact that he's got 1.4 billion Indians, and they're on an upward course economically, which is largely related to their trade with the global South. And so, you have the Brits and the US offering to sell more weapons, but they can get the weapons from Russia. They can get the energy from Russia. And then the Saudis are playing a role in this also. The Saudis were involved in the peace negotiations between India and Pakistan. So you start to see these countries functioning as independent players. Now, does that mean that Saudi Arabia is dictating the terms internationally? No, of course not. But they have something that many countries want, which is large amounts of liquid capital. And what do they want to do with it? They don't want to spend it on war. They want to build an industrial base in Saudi Arabia. They want an independent energy supply that will be there when they run out of oil. And where are they looking to? They're looking to what China's doing, the Belt and Road Initiative. So that's why, John, it's not a question of trusting Trump or believing that somehow he can outflank the Anglophiles surrounding him. They're doing everything they can to sabotage him. And he's just stubborn enough, he's going to keep plugging away. But he needs a better overall strategic perspective. And that's working with the BRICS, working with Putin, working with Xi Jinping. And it's looking at the Gaza situation and not looking at it as a real estate project, but as an area where you can have an incentive for cooperation between the Palestinians and the Israelis. So, our organization, which is relatively small, very poor, but very well respected internationally. And we're having a conference the 24th and 25th of May, which will include a lot of very prominent people speaking. The former foreign minister of South Africa, the Lady Pandor, Chaz Freeman, who's getting very well known for his appearances on Judge Napolitano. He was with Nixon in China, Chaz Freeman. He's done interviews recently with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. There are a number of others. Ray McGovern, who was with Oliver Stone in the victory celebration in Moscow. Now that's the other point. What gives Putin confidence? It's not just that they've built up their military. They just had an incredible show of what the West is calling unity among authoritarians.
Yeah.
It's so funny to see Kallas, the foreign minister of the EU, and von der Leyen, the EU or European Commission president, talking about authoritarians who don't allow democracy, when it's the EU that's saying that you can't have the popular vote count because it was probably manipulated. The authoritarians are the West. We've become what we say we oppose in the name of democracy. And the rest of the world sees it. Most Americans still haven't seen it yet. A lot of the Europeans are beginning to wonder, maybe there is something wrong with us. And there's not a single party in Europe that's over 25% in popularity. So this is where the change is coming from. What's needed is ideas, a passion, and an empathy for our fellow citizens. That's not there in the West right now. The West has done nothing to stop the slaughter of Palestinians. Nothing. And you don't think people around the world see that?
The people that don't see it are the people in the United States. That's what just baffles me. How can you say never again and then sit back and let this thing happen? Trump, 2 weeks ago, as he was caught in the doorway of an airplane, took a couple questions, and somebody pointed out what's going on in Gaza, and he said, it's terrible in Gaza, that they need food, they need health care, and we're going to do something about it. That was 2 weeks ago, if not 3 by now, and I haven't seen him do anything about it yet. It's horrible. When I was starting my studies, one of the most impressive books was one by Christopher Simpson, and I can't remember the name of it, but he described exactly go out to save the world. The opposite of what Quincy Adams told us to do. We're going to go out and find countries that don't have democracy, and share the wonderful news that democracy is the way to go. So we went out there under that banner, but every place we went, we turned into a dictatorship and not a democracy. If we really are seeing the emergence of sovereignty, then perhaps democracy is not too far behind to get rid of this. This plethora of dictatorships that are really just there to placeholders to keep our economic interests at the forefront of their policy, and the World Bank and this whole post World War II world that was built up by the Dulles brothers. I mean, are they rolling in their grave now? Are they like, oh my God, all our work is for naught? The world is going to be free, and we're beaten. Is Alan Dulles pounding sand in hell?
John, put yourself in the position of Ursula von der Leyen, who did everything she could to overturn the first round of the Romanian elections when this Cullen Georgescu came out first. And he had, I think, 28 or 29% in the first round. But he was still substantially ahead. So what do? They canceled, they had the Supreme Court of Romania annul the election. And then when he went to try and register to run, when they reset up the election, they arrested him. So they had a follow-up election. And what happened? Simeon, who is, if anything, more independent than Georgescu, got 40% this time. He doubled the choice of the European Union. Now, how can they say, well, we're for democracy, but not for this kind of democracy? Now, the same thing is going on. I've had a chance to speak with someone in a smaller Eastern European country who is a victim of a regime change. And it's a very significant strategic country. And I had a couple of talks with him. And he told me an interesting story. In 2012, when he was the prime minister, he was called in by Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. And they lectured him. They said, look, you're okay, we like you, but you've got to do what we're telling you. And that means sign the deal with the IMF. And he said, well, can you help us so that the deal is fair? Because if we sign this, we're going to have people hungry. We're going to have to shut down the healthcare system. And they said, well, you'll get some aid from the IMF once you sign the deal. So he went back to his country and they had a real robust debate in their parliament. And they voted down the IMF deal. And they said, if necessary, they'll see if they can get some kind of arrangement with Russia and China. 2 days later, the US ambassador was outside of the prime minister's window, leading a pep rally to throw him out, accusing him of corruption. And within a month, he was gone. And, you know, his story is being told now throughout Eastern Europe. They're trying to get rid of Fico in Slovakia. They're trying to get rid of Vučić in Serbia. And the people are rallying to support them. And the money that was going to these regime change coups through the USAID is now being cut off. So it's hard to underestimate how much potential there is for change, but you can't then, as I think is somewhat reflective in your pessimism, you can't ignore the fact that the people we're fighting against are resourceful, they have money, and they're plain evil. They're willing to do whatever they have to sustain their power. And that's why we have to get the real story out, the background story, who's doing this and why. And that's always been the approach that Lyndon LaRouche took. And it got him in a hell of a lot of trouble. And, you know, his idea was they can't beat me because I'm not going to quit. And he passed that on to a number of us. And so now you have someone who thinks LaRouche was the best economist in the world the last 50 years, who has just appointed the general secretary of the Belarus-Russia Union, Sergei Glaziev.
Oh.
Interesting, huh? And when he...
And I think, you know, he's right. When I've read, you know, LaRouche's economic stuff, and I'm no great economics head, but he makes so much sense. And you know, the diagram with the triple curve and everything else, he has, and I've said it for years that you know, as far as fixing the economy is concerned, I think turning it over to a LaRouche type plan would be the way to go.
Well, and the fact is that when Glaziev was appointed by Lukashenko on behalf of Putin, what Lukashenko said is that Putin wanted me to congratulate you for taking this post because we think you have the economic ideas that we need. And this is what Glaziev was the economist of the Eurasian Union before this. There are a whole group of younger economists in Russia working with the Chinese to try to replicate the Chinese economic miracle in Russia. And doing it when there are sanctions, doing it when they are considered the enemy of the human race. And this is why the Victory Day celebration, you know, May 9th in Russia, May 8th in Europe. They ignored it in Europe. And instead, they went and marched with the neo-Nazis in Kiev. So, Medvedev, who's not one who holds his tongue, Medvedev said, what are we seeing, a revival of Nazism in Western Europe? It sure looks like it. And to a lot of people in Eastern Europe and in Eastern Germany, where you had people living under the Soviet Warsaw Pact, DDR, they're supporting the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, because they want to have an alliance with Russia. And if you look at a map of Germany, this red-blue maps you see in the US, well, the blue, the AfD, all of Eastern Germany, the former communist dictatorship, is now voting first for the AfD, which the German government calls a right-wing extremist party. So all the axioms are being blown out of the water. So where do people turn? The Guardian, BBC, the New York Times. I mean, the New York Times is being forced to allow some reality. Did you see the op-ed by Tom Friedman the other day?
No, I never look at the old gray lady anymore, man.
Well, you should just take a look at this. The Sunday op-ed by Tom Friedman, where he's a supporter of the Zionist policy ever since he started writing at the Times.
Yeah.
And what he said is, his headline was, Netanyahu is not our friend. This is a dramatic shift. The Financial Times, similar stories. The London Times documenting that the British were there from the time of the Maidan coup to tell the Ukrainians, we'll back you if you go against Russia. The CIA set up 50-something stations throughout Ukraine to back up the anti-Russian neo-Nazi right sector, the Azov battalion, the Pravi sector, and so on. So, these stories are starting to leak out in the important press. Why is that? Because they're sending a message to their establishment saying, look, our old game isn't working. We have to come up with an alternative. Now, I fear the alternative could be something aimed directly at eliminating Trump. And there are precedents for that, namely John F. Kennedy. So, what's the message here for the American people? Fight for our sovereignty and fight for the sovereignty of other nations. It doesn't hurt the United States to have other nations rise up economically. China did not become a power to spite us. They became a power because their people were demanding a consumer sector, a middle class, an opening to the West. And so instead of seeing China and Russia as a threat to us, what could we do if we work together? And I think that's the message we're going to have at our conference. Again, it's the 24th and 25th of May. Go to theschillerinstitute.com and you can register. If you're in the New York area, you can come to it live. I'm going to be doing the keynote of the third panel, and my topic is going to be Tear Down the Iron Wall, Let the Waters Flow. And it's LaRouche's Oasis Plan.
You're not talking about the Iron Curtain. You're talking about the Iron Wall.
Yeah, the Iron Wall is a concept that was developed by the early Zionist revisionist grouping around Jabotinsky, who basically said, that there was a fight in the Zionist movement. Should we try and get an agreement with the Arabs or not? Because under the British mandate, the idea was you're going to divide Palestine into a Jewish home and an Arab home. The problem was there were about 700,000 Palestinian Arabs and about 60,000 Jews. So how do you carve it up so it's 50-50? And especially when there were people in the Arab community that didn't want to have a Jewish state there. So instead of negotiating, the theory was developed called the Iron Wall, which is that since no country or no indigenous people will give up their rights for nothing, we have to beat the hell out of them and let them know that they're going to have to submit to the Zionist movement. And once they've given up hope, then they'll come to us and then we can give them democratic rights. Now, the guy who formulated this Iron Wall policy was named Jabotinsky. His American secretary was the father of Benjamin Netanyahu. And Netanyahu praises this concept of the Iron Wall. Now, the better people in Israel are saying, look, the Arab League in 2002 said they would recognize Israel and work together with Israel in order to have peace for land. That is, that the land that was taken in the 67 war from Palestinians, about 1 million people between 48 and 67 lost land. It became an occupied territory, and it still is. And they have very little in the way of rights. So what the Netanyahu is saying is it's the military force of Israel that's the security for Israel. Well, how's that working? There have been 19 wars and major offensives by the Israeli army since 1948. And when they thought they had everything under control in Gaza, with surveillance, with on-the-scene spies, military power, and so on, Hamas broke through. It doesn't work. Military power doesn't guarantee security. And we see that in terms of the fight with the Houthis in Yemen. We see that in terms of the attempt to build up a Ukrainian army to drive out the Russians who are there to defend a portion of the Ukrainian population that was being killed by the Ukrainian government. So, at some point, whether you want to believe in a God or not, justice has to be done. Accountability has to take place. And, hopefully that's something that Trump is beginning to think about. So that's our message to the world, become truthful and fighters for truth.
It sounds like a very interesting conference up in New York. If I lived closer, I'd certainly get there, but I'll plan to tune in online. Harley, the whole issue of the Middle East we've talked about so many times, and we've just mentioned Zionism and Jabotinsky and the tradition of that iron wall, which is so horrific. But I have to assume that the reason that they do it is because that was the condition that Great Britain put upon letting them get away with sovereignty in the first place.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this, I think, is a huge point to say that it's not just Zionism that is the enemy here. It is the deal that set up this horrific iron wall policy of Israel in the first place. And so once again, it looks to me like a forever wars situation, a divide and conquer, India, Pakistan, Arabs, Israelis, Russians, Ukrainians, and that forever war finances the everything from the newest bestest weapons to the little package of cocaine sitting on the table.
Well, what was it that gave Lord Balfour the right to turn half the area of Palestine to become a Jewish state? Now, here's where you get into the thicket, because essentially what allowed the Jewish state to be created was the slaughter of Jews in the Holocaust. And before that, there were the pogroms and the anti-Semitic Eastern European, Russian treatment of the Jews. Now, did the British try to change that? No, they said, let's take these oppressed people and give them a plot of land where they will serve as our battering ram
Right.
to keep our presence there. Now, that's the same thing that's going on with Ukraine.
Yeah.
Do you really think that Keir Starmer cares about the Ukrainian family that's trying to survive in the midst of a war? Do you think that family, if you ask them what they want, they'd say, we want Taurus missiles to destroy Russia? No, they want peace. They want to end the fighting. And they'd like to have security guarantees. Well, Putin offered them security guarantees, and the British told them, don't take it. So this plays out over and over and over in history, where the imperial powers, whether it's the British, the French, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Belgians, they're interested in the loot they can extract and in imposing governments that will do it for them. And that's the whole geopolitical game. You use divide and conquer. So you pit Muslims against Jews against Christians. That's the Middle East. You do Hindus against Muslims in the Indian subcontinent. In the United States, you use race, you use gender. But who talks about a national mission that benefits all people who live in a nation? Well, I would say that MAGA is an attempt to do that. I think it's weak in some ways. And the American first idea is not really what's right. What's right is sovereignty for all nations. And if you're for sovereignty in your own nation, how can you not be for sovereignty for another nation? So this is where logical consistency has to come into being. And it's not a philosophical question, it's a question of survival. If we continue in the way we had been going the last 40 years, sooner or later there will be a nuclear war. And it will probably be an accident, and it will wipe out most of the human race. So we can't afford to do that. We have to have change. And if Trump is the agent of change, fine. Let's make sure he has the best ideas around him, as opposed to little people like Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz and people of that sort. Let's make sure he has the best ideas and uses them. And that's why he needs to talk to people like Putin and Xi Jinping.
I'll say one thing that really troubles me, and that is the use of these black hooded ICE squads going around picking up people and sending them away on airplanes to God knows what type of hell. That's not American. That's not who we are. Those pictures that you see, and grabbing women with their children, just take the woman, I mean, the context of it is pure terrorism and brutality, and it's disgusting. And I cannot support this idea that we're going to make a prison in El Salvador, that this Bukele guy is going to get to run all of. I mean, no.
Or in Libya,
it's just
sending people to Libya.
I cannot see that as American. It's an imperial policy. It's not an American policy. And there's so many things about what's going on with, what Greater Israel has not been shut down. I mean, Greater Israel, look at what happened to Syria. Is it not becoming a puppet state of Israel and fulfilling that crazy nightmare dream that they talk about, the Greater Israel Project? I don't see that slowing down.
Well, that's why it's important for Trump to talk to people like bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, because the Saudis are saying you have to stop the killing of the Palestinian people. And if Trump hears that from a Palestinian student at UCLA, he's not going to listen. If he hears it from Mohammed bin Salman, he might listen. And this is where we see the shift in the power relationships going on in the world. So it's not a question of cheering on the Saudis or cheering on Putin or cheering on the Chinese or booing the Germans. It's becoming a part of this fight wherever you live to bring the light of reason and the love of mankind to your neighbors and friends. That's what the fight is about. And that's what America was created to do. Be a light to all nations.
Harley, I'm going to leave it right there. I thank you so much. And as often happens, I get my hope back after I talk to you for an hour. So
hopefully it'll stay for a couple of weeks then.
Need a little sign that says the doctor is in, like Lucy used to have in the Peanuts series.
Yeah.
Harley Schlanger, the Schiller Institute, the LaRouche organization. Be sure and follow them on Twitter and their website at theschillerorganization.com. Harley Schlanger, thanks again, and we will see you in 2 weeks. All the best until then. Bye-bye.
Bye, John.